It was the moment that shook the global elite. 7 foreign mining CEOs, handcuffed, in Africa. For the first time in history, the billionaires who built an empire off African gold were forced to face the very people they exploited. Who had the courage to do this? Ibrahim Traoré, the 37-year-old president of Burkina Faso, launched a bold move that sent shockwaves from Paris to Wall Street. In a single night, he dismantled a $500 billion system of extraction and silence. But this didn't happen by chance. Behind the scenes was a 6-month secret plan-coded communications, quiet surveillance, and a mission fueled by justice. So the real question is, how did Africa flip the script overnight? Welcome to the Day 7 CEOs Were Arrested in Africa, a true story of bold leadership, quiet revenge, and the beginning of a new chapter in African history. It all began quietly in September of the previous year. While the world was distracted by headlines elsewhere, Ibrahim Traoré launched what would later be known as Operation Silent Audit. For 6 straight months, not a single word leaked yet behind closed doors. Burkina Faso was mapping one of the most sophisticated investigations in African history. Traoré ordered a full forensic audit of the national mining sector, targeting over 135 active sites across 9 provinces. Using satellite imagery, thermal drones, and even undercover operatives posing as laborers, his team compared export declarations with real-time footage and underground data. The results? Shocking. Many companies reported only 10% of their actual gold output. In just one case, a Canadian firm declared 8 metric tons while extracting nearly 85 tons in secret. That's over 3.7 trillion CFA francs, $6.1 billion USD, stolen from the people of Burkina Faso. Traoré's response was cold and clear. Either you return what you stole, or you rot behind bars. This wasn't just about gold, it was about sovereignty. The operation exposed a vast network of forged documents, offshore transfers, and diplomatic immunity abused by executives who believed Africa would never fight back. But Traoré was done asking. He was preparing to strike. The arrests were coming, but first, the trap had to close. The 15th of March, 2025, 6 a.m. While most of Ouagadougou was still asleep, elite security units launched a series of simultaneous raids across 5 cities. The operation, executed with military precision, was the final chapter of a 6-month investigation into illegal mining. Codename Operation Golden Justice. At exactly 6:03, Victor Petrov, CEO of Goldmax Inc., USA, was pulled from his luxury hotel suite near Zinieré, still in his designer pajamas. Jean-Claude Dubois of Western Gold, Canada, was apprehended in Bobo-Dioulasso while mid-call with a Swiss banker. Michael Thompson, head of Australia's Pacific Resources, was detained at Ouagadougou International Airport minutes before boarding his private jet. No one escaped. Airspace was sealed, borders closed. More than 240 officers from Burkina Faso's Financial Crimes and Environmental Protection Task Forces moved in, seizing laptops, encrypted phones, gold shipment records, and offshore contracts. In total, 7 CEOs and 19 senior managers from foreign mining giants were captured simultaneously. Not a single shot was fired. Just silence, precision, and handcuffs. First time in modern African history where a nation used combined intelligence, economic law, and environmental policy to execute a multinational CEO-level arrest. It proved that financial colonialism could be challenged not by protests, but by airtight planning and constitutional enforcement. What investigators uncovered next was nothing short of the fraud of the century. The evidence seized during the 15th of March arrests laid bare an empire built on lies, theft, and destruction. For years, foreign corporations had been siphoning billions out of Burkina Faso under the world's nose. Take Goldmax Inc. as a case in point. In 2019, their official records claimed they extracted 1 ton of gold per day. But satellite audits and drone surveillance revealed the truth. They were pulling over 10 tons daily from their mines near Gawa. That's a discrepancy worth over 27 billion CFA francs per week quietly funneled offshore. Western Gold, Canada, went further, using a complex web of fake invoices, ghost suppliers, and shell companies registered in Mauritius and Luxembourg to launder profits and avoid taxes entirely. Meanwhile, Pacific Resources, Australia, manipulated payroll systems, underreporting local salaries to evade labor contributions and income taxes, robbing both the workers and the nation. But this wasn't just about stolen gold. Entire ecosystems were destroyed. Toxic mercury and cyanide used in gold extraction had seeped into rivers like the Nakambe and Muhun, causing fish die-offs and cancer spikes in nearby villages. Thousands of families were forcibly evicted from ancestral lands, without compensation, as mining zones expanded unchecked. Traore's legal team compiled over 8,000 pages of documentation, covering tax evasion, corruption, environmental crimes, and illegal land seizures. Burkina Faso's Ministry of Justice now calls it the largest financial environmental criminal case in African legal history. This wasn't just about justice, it was a message: Africa is no longer the world's dumping ground. Behind every stolen ounce of gold was a handshake in the shadows. What investigators revealed next was not just corporate theft, it was systemic political corruption that stretched deep into Burkina Faso's former ruling elite. The files uncovered during Operation Golden Justice exposed what many had long suspected. Foreign mining giants didn't act alone. They had help from inside powerful insiders who sold out their country for personal gain. One damning document revealed that a former Minister of Energy secretly accepted $50 million USD from Goldmax Inc. in exchange for pushing a decree that cut taxes on mineral exports by 70%. That single policy cost the Burkinabe Treasury over 210 billion CFA francs in just 2 years. But it went deeper. The younger brother of a former president, once believed to be a quiet businessman, was shown to have received $100 million in offshore wire transfers from Western Gold. In return, he granted a long-term mining concession on fertile farmland, displacing over 50,000 villagers, most without any legal recourse or compensation. Entire communities, some tracing their roots back centuries, were bulldozed in weeks. Schools, mosques, and family homes were reduced to rubble to make room for open-pit mines. This wasn't just corruption, it was betrayal. This case offers a textbook example of how corporate bribes exploit weak governance and how resource-rich nations can be looted when transparency and public oversight are absent. It also underscores the importance of anti-bribery laws, whistleblower protection, and independent auditing bodies. Now, under Traore's leadership, Burkina Faso is declassifying what they call the Black Files, a sealed archive of deals, contracts, and bribes linked to foreign embassies, ex-ministers, and even international NGOs. What followed next was a moment that made history, a declaration of justice that would echo far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Just 48 hours after the arrests, President Ibrahim Traoré appeared on national television, flanked by legal officials, military commanders, and community leaders. His voice was firm, his words unmistakable. The gold beneath our feet does not belong to corporations. It belongs to the people. Within hours, his government moved swiftly. Over $2.4 billion USD in corporate assets were frozen, including mining equipment, offshore accounts, and export licenses. Over 7 metric tons of refined gold worth roughly 4.2 trillion CFA francs were confiscated from secret company vaults in Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso. All future mining contracts were placed under state control and redirected through the newly launched Burkina Faso National Mining Authority. Traoré's next move shocked the international community. He officially rejected a $100 million aid package from a consortium of Western donors, including the EU, IMF, and USAID, calling it a bandage for wounds they helped cause. His words were unapologetic. You offer us $100 million in aid while stealing $10 billion through rigged contracts? Keep your charity. We will earn our own billions from our gold, on our terms. That same day, the European Union called an emergency session to reassess its economic ties with Burkina Faso. The US State Department issued warnings, suggesting possible sanctions and aid suspensions. But Traoré didn't blink. This moment represents a rare instance of resource sovereignty in modern African politics, a case study in reversing neo-colonial economic dependency. It also illustrates how commodity-based economies, if properly regulated, can finance their development without relying on conditional foreign loans. What Traoré did was redefine the rules. He drew a line in the sand, and for the first time in decades, a leader from a small, landlocked African nation stared down the world's most powerful economies and said, "No more extraction without justice. No more aid with strings attached." While the headlines focused on CEOs in handcuffs and frozen assets, the real story was unfolding in the villages and mining towns of Burkina Faso. For decades, the people who lived above the gold had no say in where it went. They toiled in the dust, breathed in poison, and watched foreign planes carry their future away. But on the 15th of March, the day the CEOs were arrested, something changed. The silence broke. In the town of Pora, a 65-year-old former miner named Amadou stood outside a shuttered, foreign-owned shaft and said, tears in his eyes, "I worked in these mines for 40 years. My hands built their fortunes, but my children never saw the inside of a school." In the northern province of Yatenga, Musa, just 23 years old, described how he began working underground when he was only 8. "They stole my lungs in my childhood," he said. "All I got was a cough and silence." In the village of Gawa, Mariam, a 70-year-old widow, pointed to the broken earth where a mining road now runs. "They dug through our ancestral graves. We begged them to stop. They gave us 60,000 francs. That's about $100 for our ancestors." These are not just emotional stories, they are evidence of systemic injustice. For decades, international corporations have operated under opaque agreements, paying local workers less than 1% of the value of the gold they extracted. Environmental reviews were bypassed, traditional lands were seized without due process, and entire communities were relocated without compensation. This is a textbook case of resource colonialism in the 21st century, where wealth is extracted from the global south with minimal reinvestment or accountability. What Traoré's government did was not just political, it was restorative. Across Burkina Faso, people held community gatherings, prayer circles, and peaceful marches. Children painted signs that read, "L'or est à nous," the gold is ours. Elderly women carried old mining helmets to local mosques as symbolic offerings of sacrifice and hope. The people had been voiceless for too long. Now, they were the voice. What happens when a nation reclaims not only its gold but its dignity? History was not just written, it was summoned to the courtroom. What followed the mass arrests of foreign mining executives in Burkina Faso was something the world had never seen. An international special tribunal to prosecute environmental and financial crimes rooted in centuries of exploitation. Named the Tribunal for Economic Justice and Colonial Redress, this extraordinary court was established in Ouagadougou with 7 judges from 3 continents, Africa, Asia, and South America. Their presence signaled a new global alignment, a coalition of the global South, determined to hold empire to account. The tribunal's mandate was clear: to investigate and prosecute corporate and political actors responsible for crimes not only against Burkina Faso, but against the principle of sovereignty itself. At the heart of the case were 3 men, representing the worst of neo-colonial greed. Viktor Petrov, CEO of Goldmax Inc., USA, faced 234 individual charges, including large-scale tax evasion, environmental degradation, illegal land seizures, and bribery of public officials. Jean-Claude Dubois, of Western Gold, Canada, was charged with child labor violations. Testimony revealed he employed children as young as 12, forcing them to work 16-hour shifts without protection. One tragic case involved a boy named Usman, who died at 14 from advanced pulmonary fibrosis after years of exposure to toxic dust. Michael Thompson, of Pacific Resources, Australia, was accused of illegally using cyanide and mercury, contaminating 3 major rivers, the Nakambe, Muhun, and Natsinon, leading to spikes in cancer-related deaths, with over 2,000 confirmed fatalities in surrounding villages. But this wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a reckoning. For the first time, corporate executives were tried not in The Hague or Geneva, but in the very country they had plundered. President Ibrahim Traoré, though not required, attended every single session. He sat silently, flanked by survivors and families of victims. In one particularly moving moment, the courtroom heard recordings of mothers who lost their children to mine-related illness. Traoré's hands trembled, his shoulders shook, but he never interrupted. Later, in a press briefing, he admitted, "There were moments I wanted to stand and shout, but I remembered justice does not scream, it stands." This tribunal marks a historical precedent. Never before had international environmental law, child labor statutes, and economic sovereignty been combined into a single prosecution under a framework established by the Global South. It created a legal template for post-colonial accountability, drawing from the Rome Statute, African Union protocols, and indigenous justice systems. The court welcomed testimony from over 300 witnesses, including former employees, whistleblowers, scientists, economists, tribal elders, and even priests who had blessed the lands before they were dynamited. Forensic teams confirmed radioactive contamination, displaced burial grounds, and widespread falsification of export logs, some altered with AI to dodge digital audits. Each executive was given full legal representation and translators. The trials were live-streamed across Africa, broadcast in Mooré, Dioula, French, and English, making it accessible to the very people whose lives had been torn apart. The most haunting line came from a retired judge from Brazil, Maria Helena Dias, who said during a ruling session, "This court is not punishing the past, it is correcting the future." By holding the powerful accountable in a court of law rooted in the values, languages, and land of Africa, Burkina Faso transformed itself into a symbol. This was no longer just about gold. It was about dignity. After 38 days of testimony, 300 witnesses, and unprecedented international scrutiny, the gavel finally dropped. The verdict: justice served. Viktor Petrov, CEO of Goldmax, was sentenced to 50 years in prison and ordered to pay $10 billion USD in damages for tax evasion, environmental destruction, and illegal land seizures. Jean-Claude Dubois of Western Gold received 45 years and was fined $8 billion for the use of child labor and knowingly covering up mine-related deaths. Michael Thompson, of Pacific Resources, was handed life imprisonment after being found guilty of ecocide polluting 3 rivers and directly causing over 2,000 deaths. The remaining 4 CEOs received sentences ranging from 40 to 60 years, with collective financial penalties exceeding $31 billion USD. But it wasn't just about jail time. Their empires crumbled. Private jets, beachside villas in Monaco, chalets in Switzerland, super yachts, luxury art collections, and frozen offshore accounts were confiscated and transferred to a national victims fund. Traore's administration made it clear, this gold-funded luxury was built on the backs of our dead. Now it will rebuild the lives of the living. This moment is historic. The tribunal introduced the legal principle of post-colonial restitution, where wealth stolen through asymmetrical contracts can be lawfully recovered and redistributed. It challenges long-standing Western immunity in the Global South and sets a precedent for future claims by nations affected by extractive imperialism. One of the most powerful scenes followed the verdict. Families of deceased miners gathered outside the courthouse, holding pictures of their loved ones. A girl named Aisha, 9 years old, stood with her mother holding a sign. "My father died in the mine. Today, the mine died for my father." International media tried to frame the ruling as radical, but inside Burkina Faso, it was seen as the beginning of balance. After 5 centuries of one-sided exploitation, the scales had finally tipped. Justice was not the end, it was the beginning. With the courtroom dust settled and the CEOs behind bars, President Ibrahim Traoré wasted no time launching what would become Africa's most ambitious economic transformation in decades. First came the boldest move: the creation of the National Mining Company of Burkina Faso, a fully state-owned enterprise tasked with taking control of all gold, zinc, manganese, and phosphate operations across the country. Within 60 days, over 200 mining sites were nationalized, ending a 120-year legacy of foreign domination over the nation's subsoil wealth. And then, the numbers spoke louder than any speech. GDP surged by over 300% within the first fiscal year, a jump unseen in the region's modern history. 500 brand-new public schools were built and staffed, many in remote villages where children had never seen a classroom. 200 hospitals and clinics opened their doors, dramatically lowering infant mortality and expanding access to maternal care. Over 5,000 kilometers of new asphalt roads were paved, connecting isolated communities and slashing transport costs by 70%. Electricity reached 2,000 villages through a national solar grid, turning darkness into opportunity. Clean water systems were installed for over 3 million citizens, using deep boreholes, filtration, and gravity-fed infrastructure. And in a poetic twist of fate, mining accidents dropped to zero. The same lands once soaked in danger and silence were now regulated, safe, and staffed by Burkinabe engineers earning fair wages under strict safety protocols. This is a textbook case of resource-based economic justice. By reclaiming control over extraction, Traore was able to fund development without IMF loans or Western aid. His administration proved what economists long debated: with proper governance, mineral wealth can uplift rather than enslave. International observers were stunned. World Bank officials called the results statistically extraordinary. But to the people of Burkina Faso, it wasn't about stats. It was about walking children to school instead of walking them to the mine. It didn't end in the courtroom, it began there. When the verdict fell and the chains of exploitation shattered, something far greater than gold was unearthed. A spirit, a shift. A signal to the world that Africa would no longer kneel beneath the weight of quiet theft disguised as policy. Within weeks, the aftershocks rippled across the continent. In Mali, corrupt contracts were nullified overnight. In Guinea, 4 foreign executives were arrested under new anti-corruption decrees. In Niger, Parliament passed a nationalization bill modeled after Burkina Faso's mining reforms. On the stock market, Goldmax shares plummeted 87%. Pacific Resources filed for bankruptcy, its empire collapsed by a truth too long denied. And through it all, Traoré's message remained unwavering. We are not against anyone. We are only against injustice. If you come with clean hands, you are welcome. But if you come to take what is not yours, you will be held to account. This is not merely politics. It is restorative justice on a continental scale. It is the redrawing of moral lines, not with weapons, but with laws, dignity, and truth. Theologically, it echoes the words of the prophets, "Woe to those who build their wealth on the backs of the poor." Sociologically, it forces a question long buried. What is development if it leaves the people in poverty while their soil funds skyscrapers abroad? What is order if the law protects corporations but not communities? And emotionally, for men like Amadou, for children like Musa, for mothers like Mariam, this is resurrection. Not of bodies, but of history, honor, hope. Burkina Faso did not rise alone. Africa is awakening. The road ahead is long. Traoré is not perfect. The forces he opposes are deeply entrenched. But as long as the people stand, the story stands with them. Justice has found its place. The story has just begun. If this message touched you, save this video. Share it with those who still believe in truth. You, leave your comments below. What does justice look like where you live? This is not just about Burkina Faso. This is about us all.